It may not be outright discrimination, it may not be outright harassment and violence, but I like to describe microaggressions as the remnants, the
Mhm.
leftover pieces of macro systems of oppression. And so when we experience them, they can hurt because we may be well aware of where these things are coming from. The perpetrator may not have any awareness. They may be ignorant. That is, they are lacking the knowledge of where this thing stems from. And I think in an effort to convey to people how hurtful these things are, we sometimes equate them with violence.
Okay, Camille, welcome. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you.
I'm so excited for this conversation. Um, it's been a long time coming. We've had
Yes.
many of these conversations, just you and I talking on the phone or in person and as friends, but we never made it an episode. And I mean, we're in an election year. And so there's like everything political is rising up for people. So why not just trigger some more bitches together? How about that?
Right? Let's
Let's
just
just
do it.
let's just do it. So I'm gonna give everyone a little background. The reason I'm doing this with Camille is because so when I met Camille, 2021,
Mhm.
you came as a student in the course, you offered to work with us, little stuff on the side. You became so powerfully important in this company, and now you're just a fixture. I told you last night you have to leave. I'm not ever getting rid of you. But you uncoupled DEI for me. And
Oh,
this is what I want people to understand. When I met you, my ideas of DEI were I wouldn't even call them negative. I was just literally repelled by what I have seen.
yeah.
And right, I was repelled by how people were I was especially repelled even more than how people were teaching it, how people were emerging from these classes and workshops
Mm.
with what appeared to me like really regressed racial stereotypes, amongst other things. And it was so shocking because I'm like, this is supposed to be about nurturing diversity, but we're just getting more segregated in our biases. Like, what's going on here? So I started like talking to people that teach DEI and trying to understand their theories, what's going on behind it, watching their videos, following them on social media. And to me, there was just this really obvious unprocessed trauma. If someone had unprocessed racialized trauma, I'd see them using their platform to be really either super cruel to one race or to their own, depending on the situation.
Mhm.
People that had unprocessed sexual trauma being really hard, let's say, on men and different with women. Like I would just see the person teaching DEI was teaching it through their pain lens and then creating these kind of like stories about huge diverse groups of people, but distilling them as essentially good or bad. So I'm starting with that because when I met you and you're like, I do DEI, I thought, oh, and then and then when I really
Oh, I
met you,
kinda liked
oh
you.
my God, I like that. I like you a lot. You don't seem like all these other people I've met. And then when I started talking to you and you started, especially when you started working with us, and
Mhm.
especially when you started managing the community and doing the
Oh,
calls with me, that's when I was like, I remember the day it happened. I remember I was on the phone with you when the big uncoupling, the great uncoupling occurred. And I was telling you that someone on Instagram was starting like a hate campaign against me because I had my hair up in a bun, like a top
oh,
knot and top knot, and I had my dots on as always. And this woman who was born to Indian immigrants, so born in America but Indian heritage, she was spreading like really hateful stories about me, appropriating her culture because I had a bun. Interestingly enough, it wasn't about my dots. I thought it would be. It was just about the bun. I was
mhm.
like, that's the first time I was told I couldn't have a bun because I have light skin. And I remember calling you and telling you, and I was prepared. I had a clench as I was telling you on the phone. I was prepared for you to be like, yep, she's right. You better take that down. You better apologize. Cause that's all I had seen to
Yeah.
that point about DEI. And you were like, that sounds like she's triggered. And everything stopped me. I thought, well, that's what I thought, but I didn't think that's what I was going to get. And you and I had this amazing conversation about appropriation, about
Right.
privilege. And the more I would talk to you and the more I would see you in our membership space, the more I would truly see someone who actually cultivates diversity. And honestly, the first one I have met so far. And so
Wow.
this is a long time coming. This is 3 years to have this public conversation. But the first thing I want to say, just how do you feel about all that I'm saying so far? Like, where does that lie in you? What do you notice?
like some blushing, like, oh, that's so sweet, that's amazing. Thank you. I'm so glad that, that stayed with you. And that yeah, it's really an honor to hear you reflect on what you experience of me as a co-teacher in the space, and someone my intent. I really do love the idea of cultivating more diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm glad that how you experience me and my approach to this work feels uh authentic to that intent and actually productive of that happening.
Yeah, it does. And it feels like even when you said I really love diversity, equity, inclusion, you actually love it as a relational tool. You don't love it as some government department. Like you love it as a person. And
Oh
that's what's
yeah,
different about you. You
yeah.
don't politicize this. And I remember the first time I ever heard you say, again, to me when we were talking, it was maybe a year ago, you said something like, if I'm in a room full of atheists and there's two Christians, I'm going to actually help them understand the Christians. I've never heard anyone say that.
Mhm.
Or if there's a Republican in the room and everyone else is Democrats, the Republican might be the more marginalized one, like relationally in the space. We're going to help them understand each other. So you literally are looking at whoever in that room is not understood. How can we bring you all together, whether it's one black woman out of 20 white men
Yeah.
or one Republican out of 20 liberals? Like you're
Mhm.
not really caring. And that's what makes me believe you. So my first question is like, how did you come to that ability to truly not see this through a politicized lens, but like, I just want to maintain diversity for everyone here and inclusion? Like, how did you get there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things that led up to my approach as a DEI practitioner. I think, first and foremost, there are my own experiences with marginalization, with particularly being Black, being a woman, and later in life, specifically identifying as Muslim. And so those specific experiences, my own experiences in life in general, and particularly in the corporate world, I think sort of influence not just wanting to profess or share with people my personal experiences with marginalization, but it was also an opportunity for me to empathize with experiences of marginalization that may not be my own. So while I may not understand or know the specifics of someone else's experiences with marginalization, I know what marginalization feels like. And so that also bred a bit of curiosity in me about other people's experiences with marginalization. Um, and that actually sort of brings me to my next experience. That one that was really salient with me was that I went to college and graduated. I was going into business, and it was pretty well known or expected of us or told to us, like, hey, you're going into the business world, you are going to be predominantly around conservatives or Republicans, if for nothing else because of the business implications and tax implications. So I went to a university, even though we're here in the South, that can kind of lean liberal, and so they're just like, get used to it. You're going to be, this is another form by which you are probably going to experience marginalization, so just be ready to be one of the only ones. um, but what was interesting, that the market research firm that I ended up working for, even though again it was still here in the South and it's a business, a lot of the individuals were from the North. So they kind of moved to the South, and so the majority of people leaned liberal, leaned Democrat, and there were like it was a small company, maybe like a total of 500 people, and in the office I was working in, maybe 50, and there were two or three Republicans. And what was interesting to me, what stood out, is like I would hear some of the comments like some of my other coworkers would make about conservatives or about Republicans, and they felt comfortable doing it because most
Mhm.
everybody was Democrat or liberal. And I remember sitting there like thinking, oh, that was supposed to be me. I was supposed to be cringing because I'm hearing people making these comments. And I would kind of look over at the Republicans or the people I knew who were more conservative and just sort of watch them, and they wouldn't respond, but I was just sort of imagining like how I would feel in that moment.
Mhm.
And it was just an interesting witnessing of being prepared for a situation in which where I was supposed to be the marginalized one, but I ended up being in the majority. And then I would say the last thing that really influenced my approach was, yeah, like I started going, I'm not DEI practitioner by trade. I was in market research, but at the company I was at, they were having DEI workshops, and I went. And this was still sort of like at the beginnings of DEI.
Which,
And
which,
I
what,
sort
when
of,
would you say that
oh,
was? What year was that?
that was 2014. So about 10 years ago. Um, and the experience I had with a lot of the workshops was that they were too fucking nice, and that they didn't want to say the word black, they didn't want to say the word gay. It was more so about focusing on our similarities. And I was just like, that's not inclusion. Like, that's assimilation, that's avoidance. We're still uncomfortable with difference. And that's what I wanted to do. Let's acknowledge the fact that difference, disagreement is so fucking uncomfortable. And then let's do the work from there.
Mhm. I mean, just first of all, that story about you being in the majority when you were preparing to be in the minority is so gorgeous. I never knew
Mhm.
that. And again, this is what I mean when I say to everybody, you don't look at this through a politicized lens. Because, and what I mean by that, it just, again, to not leave out words gay and black, let's not leave out the word liberal. Like, we
Yeah.
know DEI is very liberal. It's
Mhm.
not something that most conservatives are begging for. It's like, it's known in left liberal spaces.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, the actual problem with it, because the intention and the what it's serving and what it's hoping to accomplish, gorgeous. I would never question that for a second.
Yeah.
Because it's seen through usually a liberal left lens, it doesn't include 50% of the rest of the country.
Mhm.
It doesn't include, well, situational marginalization. It includes
Yes.
identity marginalization. And that's so important to me because identity wise, you should have been marginalized, like a black woman, Muslim. Like, you should have been
Mhm.
the marginal one in the group, like the minority, and you weren't in terms of the political leaning that you
Yes.
related to.
Yeah.
So this is also a big part of your work is you don't have these simple, what is it called? You call it fast food DEI?
Fast food. Yeah. Yeah. There are no one size fits all, like hard fast rules. Because I even love the nuance you noted there. Yeah, at that company, I didn't experience marginalization due to my political leaning. It ended up being predominantly Democrat liberal, but I still did experience marginalization due to some of my other identities. And so it was interesting being with both of those, and they kind of reinforced each other. They created, again, another a sense of empathy and curiosity. Like, at that very same company, I had a leader. I was going out to lunch with them, like when I first started there, first week, and this is, you know, this particular instance is 2008, leading up to that election, and the individual starts gushing over Barack Obama, saying like they're a white boomer, saying like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe what I've seen over my life to go from the civil rights movement to possibly having the first black candidate. Like, this blows my mind." And then she looks at me and says, "Ugh, but you know he's a Muslim." Now, at that time, I had begun to identify as Muslim, but I don't wear a hijab. And clearly, she didn't realize I was a Muslim. And I fawned in that moment. I said, I wanted to say, well, first, no, he's not. Second, so
So I
what
was
if he
thinking like he
was?
was.
Yeah. And then thirdly, he's not, but I am. But I didn't. So in that same company, I experienced marginalization from being a Muslim from that one individual. But and with that experience, I could still witness the privilege I was experiencing of being liberal and Democrat leaning. And I could see the sort of the marginalization those who weren't liberal were experiencing in that same environment.
And that's part of the beauty of your work because and this is where our work really connects in this nice way because you and I are very much into individual experience, not group
Mhm.
experience. I mean, I'll speak for myself. Collective experience is real, right? Like,
Yep.
collective identity is real, and there's still individuals that make up that collective. So I don't just assume, for instance, people who survived the World Trade Center are all traumatized. The
Yeah.
same way I don't assume everyone who's black is underprivileged economically. I don't
Mhm.
have those. I'll see per person what they teach me. And so you really do that. And what's interesting is you had that in you before you went to DEI. Because like you said, you were in that place, you realized, whoa. And you were empathizing with the two or three conservatives who were kind of like going into freeze or going
Mhm.
into fawn, and people were saying negative things about conservatives. And it's such a great example because marginalization in this case, a lot of people think it's always these horribly violent acts.
Mhm.
It's just simply, it's just, well, you tell me how you would define it in that case.
Yeah. So generally, this is how I'll describe marginalization as the absence of privilege. And privilege is simply the aspects of our identity that align with the standard, dominant, or majority culture. And so that's the definition of privilege, and by proxy, the definition of marginalization that I like to use, because we can look at it both at a macrocosm and at a microcosm. So, for example, like in a company, or I could potentially work at a Black-owned company where the vast majority of people who work there are Black. So in that microcosm, my race actually won't experience marginalization.
Mhm.
Now, in the macrocosm that is the United States, I can still experience marginalization. So now we're able to hold different levels of interaction and different spheres of engagement.
Because it's relative to your literal environment.
Mhm.
It's constantly changing. And this is the piece about group identity, even within, let's say, a room full of Black women, you might experience something because you're Muslim, right?
Yeah.
You might
Yes.
experience something because you're pregnant. I mean, who knows? Like, there's so
Exactly.
many
So
things.
yeah, just because I'm quote unquote safe from one form of marginalization doesn't mean the other forms of marginalization won't be present. This is why I'm not a big proponent of safe spaces, because I think when we talk about safe spaces, oftentimes we're saying like, oh, now I don't have to worry about marginalization. And that's not true. I may not have to worry about a particular type of marginalization. For example, when I go to a mosque, I don't really have to worry about being marginalized because I'm Muslim, but I can still experience marginalization because I'm a woman, or because I'm Black, or because I don't speak Arabic fluently, or a whole host of other things.
Or because you're pro-gay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
We talked about this before because there's,
Mhm,
a majority of Muslims are not open to homosexuality.
mhm.
You're one of them that are. I find more
Yeah.
American Muslims are, but
Yes.
is that your experience as well?
Generally speaking. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I
Mhm.
think it's interesting just to s- I'm saying all this because I'm trying to build a picture for people. I mean, everyone listening to this knows you by now, but they don't know this deep part of your work. 'Cause we never
Yeah.
talk DEI. And one reason I don't talk DEI is because the negative connotations on top of it. And
Yes.
again, it's very politicized, and I like talking politics in like a somatic way, but not in a like a tool that we're
Yeah.
using. But it's important to me because it has shaped so many negative experiences for people over the last couple years. I would say, especially online, interestingly enough, from
Hmm.
DEI teachers and practitioners doing this work on Instagram and having webinars, and what I see people walk away from, first of all, the first thing I see is an equating, how do I say this? Because you're saying marginalized. And when I hear you say that, I hear, well, you said it yourself. I'm not part of dominant culture. I'm not part of the
Hmm.
majority, essentially.
Yep. Hmm.
That doesn't necessarily mean someone did anything wrong to you. And I think
Yeah.
that's important to understand. And I want to first pull that apart with you because if people were leaving these workshops doing what I would see them do, and I would see them reposting it and telling me about it, is if you are if you're saying something to somebody that's offensive, let's say, or that's truly innocently ignorant, or just simply like you said, someone looks at you and says, "Oh, he's a Muslim. I'd vote for him, but he's a Muslim, and you're a
Hmm.
Muslim." That's not someone being violent. Yet a
Hmm.
lot of these, in my opinion, yet a lot of these DI instructors have equated like a microaggression or even insulting someone with violence, which
Yeah.
then creates this obsession with safe spaces and never triggering someone.
Yes.
That's what makes you very different. I have not met one DEI person that's okay with people being triggered. So
Oh, yeah.
so tell me, so you're getting off on it now.
I
So,
am. I am. Oh, we're going to talk about triggering people. Yes, let's do
so
it.
like let's first talk about how marginalization, microaggressions, triggering, insulting someone, how these don't have to be horrible things. Like, can you start
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, yeah. So again, yeah, going back to, I'll even start with privilege. Again, the aspects of our identity that align with the standard, dominant, or majority culture. And we experience marginalization when we have aspects of our identity that don't align with the standard or majority culture. We are on the margins, so to speak. When that happens, can violent situations occur? Absolutely. And there can also be, again, like the term that's come up, like microaggressions, where it may not be outright discrimination, it may not be outright harassment and violence, but I like to describe microaggressions as the remnants, the
Mhm.
leftover pieces of macro systems of oppression. And so when we experience them, they can hurt because we may be well aware of where these things are coming from. The perpetrator may not have any awareness. They may be ignorant. That is, they are lacking the knowledge of where this thing stems from. And I think in an effort to convey to people how hurtful these things are, we sometimes equate them with violence.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think that's helpful, because it isn't violence, but it can still be hurtful. Like
Yeah.
um we don't have to conflate the two to make people understand just how important it is, or the impact that it has on an individual. Um, and then the other thing with microaggressions is that simply because I may be triggered doesn't necessarily mean that the thing I experienced was a microaggression. And I think sometimes we can get in a place where we're afraid of triggering someone, or we get upset when we're triggered, and then we say, well, it's a microaggression. No, a
Yeah.
trigger can be anything. A scent of cinnamon could trigger me. Doesn't necessarily mean that that cinnamon is a microaggression. So I part of my personal practice is I actually don't espouse getting rid of biases, privilege, and microaggressions. It is my assertion that the presence of bias, privilege, and microaggressions are not the barrier to diversity,
Mhm.
equity, and inclusion. It is our inability to recognize them, to be with them, to acknowledge their impact that is the barrier. So rather than, and this is sort of where we get back into fast food DEI, rather than coming up with a list of all the microaggressions I should never commit, instead, I want to support people in developing the capacity to be with a situation when a microaggression occurs, whether I'm the perpetrator,
Mhm.
that is the giver, or the receiver, or a witnesser of the microaggression. Can we cultivate, like what I like to call a call in culture rather than a call out culture? Do I have the capacity to call someone in, not from a fight response, not from a defensive stance, but to invite them to understand what may have just happened, working from the place that maybe they don't even know what they just said or did. And then as the giver, do I have the capacity to be called in? That is, can I not go to a place of judgment and not say, well, I guess I just can't say anything nowadays? Can I be curious about what I said or did and take in what this person may have to share with me? And then with that awareness, potentially pivot my actions if I so choose. I
Okay,
think I hit
so
all the
much.
things you said. Yeah.
Yes, and so much here. So let's play with this. So first of
Okay.
all, I'm just going backwards a bit. Develop capacity to experience a microaggression, to be triggered by someone, to be offended by someone.
Mhm.
That's a huge part of the equation that's missing from modern, I guess it's all modern, but
Mhm.
common majority
Yeah.
DEI. I'm just gonna say DEI. It's not Camille Leak at this point because I don't know any other ones. The moment I do, I will tell everybody. But DEI that's not Camille Leak. I have not seen or heard anyone talk about that part. And what I mean by that part is the receiver.
Mhm.
So much of the focus is on the person, even the words perpetuating microaggression. That's the focus. It's not on, well, what's my agency and how I choose to respond to someone saying something ignorant? To me, people say ignorant things all the time.
Mhm.
And when there's diversity involved, the level of ignorance is going to rise meteorically because there's diversity, meaning you don't all agree on the same thing. You don't know each other's backgrounds. You don't understand the language or culture or reasons for looking or doing or thinking a certain thing. So, how can you not rub up against someone and offend them and say something that will be perceived cruel or
Yeah.
painful or even like, I'm a little scared to come out of my box now because you said this thing?
Yeah.
And I love how you say you use your own marginalization to empathize with anyone being marginalized,
Mhm.
regardless of their identity or their race or their religion. And I totally agree. And being intersex, and especially being from a mixed Puerto Rican family, but appearing white, people would talk shit on Puerto Ricans all the
Mm.
time to me growing up. And it would like be a knife in my heart, and especially when I was really young, like 6, 7 in school, and all the kids were saying really bad, horrible things about the Puerto Ricans, I would just freeze
Yeah.
because I wouldn't want to be like, that's my family, because then
Mhm.
I'd be that person. So
Exactly.
I know that feeling too. And I'm saying this because what happens? Where does DEI, I don't even say go wrong, but what's the imbalance that occurs when you only focus on, quote, the perpetrator and you don't focus on empowering people to show up against people or with people that might say something ignorant?
Yeah, so I would say even the focus on the perpetrator is typically, how do I say, it's not even on the perpetrator. It's on, these things are microaggressions, don't do these things. And it doesn't, at least for me in my experience, there's not conversation on like why are some of these things microaggressions? Like giving examples of where they come from. How does this macro system of oppression, how does this remnant stem from that macro system of oppression? So I like to give people really common everyday examples of microaggressions that we may not even realize are microaggressions because we're simply ignorant. That is, we literally lack the knowledge, and that's all that it is. And so for me, I feel what goes wrong is that a lot of this is focused on people are looking for a set of rules. Just tell me the things that I shouldn't say or do, or give me a list of rules I can give to other people and tell them not to say or do. And then I'm done and I don't have to deal with this anymore, which for me is a form of dissociation. That is, it's just another signal that difference, disagreement is still really uncomfortable. I don't actually want to be with it. I just want a list of rules and we don't do these things. And then we just continue to ignore it. So again, for me, I think it is more about, helping people understand how microaggressions come to be. What are some examples of ones that that permeate our society, and also just helping people understand that I always like to talk about it as the forever journey. Like there are things I may have used to say and do years ago that I don't say and do now because I gained awareness about where they come from, that they stem from macro systems of oppression. But I'm pretty sure, almost 100% sure, that I'm a microaggressing today, and I just don't know it. But I'll learn something new will come to my awareness. And 2, 3, 5 years from now, I may not be doing some of the things I'm saying and doing now. So it's also not about getting to a finish line. It's not about getting to like, it's over and I don't have to think about this anymore. So a long way of saying that I think the point that we can oftentimes miss with diversity, equity, inclusion work is that it's not a check on a list. At least for me, it's not a check mark on a list. It's not a finish line that we're trying to get to. It's an ongoing journey of curiosity and self-discovery.
Well, as you're saying it, what I'm hearing is exactly that. I'm thinking, well, this is what a real relationship is like. When you're everyone listening, your best friend, your lover, your parent, your child, it's ongoing exploration of what does this person need. And you offend this person every day without trying to. You love them with all your heart, and you still say something that feels cruel to them or hurts them or feels like misguided. And I think, and I told you this before, I think microaggression is a horrible term to use.
Yeah.
Because everything you're teaching and everything you say and the whole purpose under it, super important. I think of like, I go to the Oprah handbag story where she walks into I think it was in Switzerland, where she walks into the Swiss purse handbag store. The Oprah Winfrey Show wasn't there at the time, so she wasn't famous there, which she loved. And she walked in and she's looking at this purse. She's like, I want to see that purse. And the woman goes, you want to see this purse? And she's like, I do. No, you don't want this purse. She's like, no, like, let me see the purse. She's like, trust me, you can't afford this purse. And Oprah said she realized, and she hadn't experienced that in 20 years. So
Yeah.
I see what's happening here. She didn't get offended. She knew the woman was ignorant. And she just said, okay, I'm going to go somewhere else. And she went to a different store and had a great experience. I love that picture because first of all, we see this remnant, this woman believing, well, because you're Black, you can't afford the purse, right? And then we also see Oprah, who has incredible capacity of not getting offended easily, being like, oh, this is you. This has nothing to do with me. I'm going to move on. And the reason why I don't like microaggression is because the woman with her unconscious or conscious bias based on what was left over, I wouldn't call her an aggressor. Now, a lot of people disagree with me on that, but I don't see aggressive behavior. Aggressive behavior to me is like, get out of here. Your kind isn't welcome. That's aggressive. So when I hear the term micro, and this might be my overcoupling, when I hear the term microaggression, it's like it has micro in front of it. Which infers that we're not actually experiencing a lot of, in this case, racial aggression the way we used to. Of course, there's some, but in terms of the way it used to be. So now we have micro because we're kind of like and this is what a lot of people judge DEI for. We're looking for the aggression. We're looking for, well, I got triggered. You must have been racist or being microaggressive. Could you help expand my mind and anyone listening to how can we see beyond the word aggression? Because that's what, like everything you say I'm with, and then when I hear microaggression, I'm like,
the term microaggression.
Can't we have a better word?
So I will say that I'm actually settled in the word only for this reason, because it pisses people off, quote unquote, on both sides. So I get people who are upset because of the words aggression is in there, because they feel like it conflates it, or we don't really, it doesn't really align with what's happening. And then conversely, I get people who get pissed off because micro's in there. It's like you're diminishing the impact that it's actually happening. And so when that happens, that's usually a signal to me that, oh, it's just right. If nobody's content
No
with
one's
it,
happy with it.
yeah. And I do think it's the balance of both. It's a microaggression. And like I said, I'm sort of content in it because I do think the qualifier of micro being there. But I think to your point, one of the things about microaggressions that I think is important to understand is that we don't necessarily have to be triggered by them.
Mhm.
Like we can experience them, and we may not even be threatened by them. In the absence of that threat, we get to decide how we want to respond. We may completely ignore the situation, or we may want to say, hey, I don't think this was your intent, but I'd like to share with you the impact of what you just said or did, if you're open to that feedback. Or we may assess that the situation isn't physically or psychologically safe enough for us to have that conversation. But yeah, I'm generally settled in that term because I've also heard complaints about, well, what if we didn't call it privilege? What if we called it something else? And so, or what if we didn't call it bias? Oh, bias. So I generally am
It
not
all
one
has an
for,
overcoupling.
for changing the words, but I really like helping people understand what these things mean and what they don't.
Mhm.
Bias doesn't mean racist, sexist, homophobic. Privilege doesn't mean that you didn't work to get to where you are. Microaggressions doesn't mean that you're a hateful, ignorant person. So that's what I like to work on.
Yeah, and I can respect it. I still don't like it, but
Yeah.
I can totally respect it because
Mhm.
I get it, and we do our best with words. And when I think of microaggression, I think, well, what we're really talking about is an action that comes from unconscious bias.
Mhm.
Like the woman at the shop has an unconscious bias, or conscious in this
Yeah.
case, bias of like, oh, a black woman can't afford this purse.
Yeah.
So her microaggression, her action comes from her bias. And I guess to me, but you say other people have an overcoupling bias. To me, is like, of course, we can work with
Yeah.
that. And other people would be like, no,
Bias.
no,
We
no,
can talk
no.
about that any day. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm like, Mike, because aggression is in there, and we even use the word perpetrator before we say microaggression,
Well, see,
it
I don't
paints
even use
such
the
a
term
picture.
perpetrator. I like to use giver, receiver, and witnesser.
Okay,
We can
okay.
either we can give a microaggression, we can receive a microaggression, or we can witness a microaggression taking place.
Okay, interesting. It's good for people to hear because I think it helps people to uncouple. It's hard when you're the giver, let's say, of a
Mhm.
microaggression, to not have charge when aggression is part of what you've given.
Yeah.
And so I just think for people listening, it's like, if you want to play with this work, if you want to do this, maybe uncouple aggression from it. Realize you're not being aggressive. It's a term to express the
And
experience.
to that point, because I also find this very helpful with bias and privilege. Each and every person has biases. Each and every person has privileges. Each and every person has committed microaggressions. So if you find yourself being like, oh, I just committed a microaggression, and getting into that defensive sort of fight response, or any sort of threat response, again, tap into that empathy. Think about, when have you received microaggressions? What has that been like in your experience? And so that's something, for me, that's part of what I try to cultivate when I ask people to invest in a call in versus a call out culture. Call out culture says, oh my God, how could you do that? How could you not know that that's disrespectful? A call in culture says, hey, don't think this was your intent, but I'd like to share with you the impact of what you did. Similarly, call out culture says, well, what are you talking about? I didn't mean it that way. I guess I can't say anything nowadays. Everybody's so fucking PC. Call in culture says, oh, yeah, no, I'd actually like to hear what you say. I'm curious. I didn't know that this was a thing.
Hey, my friends. I created a space that is affordable, accessible, and anyone is allowed to join anytime, and it's called the Library Membership. The Library Membership is an online private platform that hosts dozens of my webinars, my somatic practices, private mini lectures, and movement practices. There's also a monthly sound healing And you'll be invited to a weekly Tuesday live mini practice with me and other participants. You'll also be invited to be a live audience member in our monthly HLN team podcast recordings, where you'll take place in the Q&A that happens off air after the episode is filmed. For more information on this membership, click on the link below or go to holisticlifenavigation.com and click on membership and then library. You can join right now and you can cancel or pause your subscription at any time. I look forward to seeing you in there.
And it's not to come to a consensus in that moment. It's not to come, and this is another way I kind of differentiate from some other DEI practitioners. I'm not in the business of trying to say what is right, what is wrong, or who is right, who is wrong, or that only one group of people can be givers of microaggressions. What I am in the business of doing is helping people develop a capacity to be with non-consensus, to be with a conversation, not a debate, to be with sharing and expressing of experience and perspective without the need for seeking to persuade the other to agree with you.
Yeah, and you really do that well. And I think one of my goals, if I had one for people listening, is those that want to do DEI work or have done it and are kind of feeling like bitter or shut down or scared because of doing it. Camille's a really great person to work with to kind of undo the new biases that might have been formed from doing it, with an educator that, again, I think was in a trauma response.
Yes.
And I wanted to highlight that part with you
Mhm.
because when I see a DEI practitioner in a trauma response, let's say it's around race,
Mhm.
what is extremely common is either a white instructor talking about how horrible white people are, including themselves, or let's say a black instructor talking about how white people ought to decenter themselves and black people have been oppressed. And those narratives to me are so unhelpful for either side. How do you do this work? Because again, when you were doing it with corporate, you were predominantly in white spaces.
Mhm.
How do you do this work without going into a trauma response and using the privilege of teaching people and being on a platform, not using that against them because you have been harmed racially? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah,
how does
yeah.
that work? Explain that to us.
So, it's interesting. I think I was able to take some time earlier in life to be with even the little bits of marginalization I had personally experienced, as well as the marginalization through my lineage generationally, to really to be with that, to be with the anger, the grief, the frustration. Um, it wasn't conscious; it was just sort of happenstance. So I think that was just a fortunate circumstance of my journey. But I think it is really important for us to understand that if I was to come into this work from a trauma response, that is even with the intent of I have to change these people's minds or I
Mhm,
have to save these people, I'm going to show up in a very, very different way.
mhm,
It truly is my intent. Like when I was sitting in these workshops, I'm like, yo, this is too fucking polite. This isn't going to change anything. Again, my intent wasn't change. My intent was, can we get comfortable with not being polite? Can we
mhm.
get
Yeah.
comfortable with difference? And so that's fundamentally how I come to it. So yes, I talk about privilege and marginalization because those are uncomfortable topics to be with. And so again, that's the
Mhm,
approach that I take. It's uncomfortable to be with difference. It's uncomfortable to be with disagreement. It's uncomfortable to be with someone else's experience of marginalization. Let's explore that discomfort and let's slow it down. Why might it make us uncomfortable to be with these things? Why is it uncomfortable for us to disagree? Why is it so uncomfortable for us to talk about religion and politics? And if we can begin to identify or isolate the aspects that feel so uncomfortable, that feel like it's a life or death situation, how do we then begin to relate to one another and or relate to difference outside of that life or death idea or that
mhm.
life or death feeling in the body?
Well, as you're saying that, one thing that again makes the spaces you create really helpful and I would say like successful in this is you don't play with the hierarchy model. So,
Mm-mm.
when you're talking about, let's say when you're talking about religion, you're not going to say in the room, like, hey, Christians, you all need to get uncomfortable because you
Yeah.
suck and you've been running this place for hundreds of years. Like, you don't work that way. I've literally seen people work that way. And
Mm.
so, and you don't get into a room say, okay, all the white people get uncomfortable, be uncomfortable. Like, you're also saying it to the black people. You're also saying it to
Yeah.
the gay people. You're also saying it to the straight people. Like, you're really across the board saying, I want all of you to express how you experience discomfort in this workplace, not just the majority or the minority.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
unique, Camille. Like, do you realize that?
I don't think I do.
I don't think you do. I do
I
not
don't
think
think
you
I
do.
do. I don't think I do because, yeah, to me, I'm always about holding both. I think we can absolutely hold the both. Like, yes, we can identify within either this microcosm or this macrocosm. What is the dominant culture or identity?
Mhm.
And we can also still hold that for all of us, we're going to have aspects of our identities that experience privilege and aspects that experience marginalization.
Mhm.
So it's about the nuance rather than just identifying with, oh, I am marginalized or oh, I am privileged. And can we start to hold all of that? Because yeah, like I said, I don't care who you are, I don't care what identities you have. Each and every one of us have biases. It's just the way the human nervous system works. Each and every one of us have privileges.
Mhm.
None, I mean, I shouldn't say none, but I have yet to meet one person whose all their identities align with marginalization. They don't experience any form of privilege. And each and every one of us commit microaggressions simply because we cannot know all the different
No.
remnants of macro systems of oppression that have impacted various communities. Like I was 17 years old before I knew the term don't gyp me, like what that meant. I was like, first of all, I didn't know that gypped connected to gypsies.
I
And
still
then
don't.
secondly, I didn't know gypsies were like a thing. I thought they were like in cartoons and fairy tales with like an actual. So even in that, it's not even in that example, I'm not even acting on a bias. I'm simply
That's right.
repeating something I've heard and I don't even know where it comes from.
Yeah. But again, I just have to say it again. Like, that's what makes you unique is you're
Mhm.
such a true, like, you're so unbiased in teaching your work about bias, which again is really fascinating. Because, like I said, when I've been in rooms and groups where they're saying, like, let's get comfortable being uncomfortable,
Mhm.
they don't all say that, but the idea
Yeah.
is like, I want you to be uncomfortable. They're usually only talking to the majority identity in the room.
Yeah.
So if it's like men and there's three women, okay, men, you're going to be uncomfortable so you can feel what it's like to be marginalized. Or if
Mhm.
it's majority black and like three white people, okay, you're going to get uncomfortable. It's never been just across the board. Hey, let's
Yeah.
all. And that's why your work's so effective because everyone's able to empathize and connect from that place. If I'm teaching this in a room, again, let's say full of men, and there's like five women, and I'm saying, okay, men, you're going to get uncomfortable because you're the majority and you don't know what it's like to be in. How effective is that going to be at helping people unfold and feel
Right.
tender? Not going to happen, right?
No.
So they sit through the session with you, they smile, they fall, and they say all the right things. They don't come off as sexist in this case with men and women. And
Mhm.
then they leave with a ton of resentment, bitterness, and extra hypervigilance to not be offensive, which doesn't create relationships. It creates
Right.
even more division because they're being polite, but they're not being honest.
Mhm.
So, how do you tend to that when people come in? Do you, first of all, do you notice
Yeah.
people coming in afraid you're going to do that to them or not? Like, okay, tell me
Yes,
about that.
yes, yes.
How does
So,
that
I
work?
mean, generally, I can get a vibe of people if they're just kind of like, DEI, can't we just focus on the business? Like, all right, tell me not to be racist. Come on.
Right.
And I can also begin to get a vibe of when they're just like, oh, this is a little different. Because again, I humanize this. I like to normalize bias, privilege, and microaggressions. None of us
Mhm.
are can avoid having them or committing them. But two, I really, really normalize it. And I constantly give my own biases. I constantly acknowledge my own privileges. I constantly acknowledge my own microaggressions. And so I'm not sitting here pointing my finger at you saying, hey, all of you out there, you need to do this work because this fucked up the environment you're creating. I want to normalize the conversation around bias, privilege, and microaggressions. Because again, my intent, and this is different than some DEI practitioners, is not to get rid of these things. I don't choose to put my energy into getting rid of my own biases. I'm certainly not going to say that you need to get rid of yours.
Mhm.
But can we begin to witness our biases? Can we interrupt reflexively acting on our biases? I'm not going to get rid of my privileges. I can't get rid of my privileges. It's just who I am. And so I certainly can't expect you to be guilty for your privileges. But if I can acknowledge my privileges, there might actually be a little power, some leverage in there. And I could leverage it if I want to show up as an ally or an advocate. And then with microaggressions, again, we're not going to know everything. So if we can approach microaggression, whether we're the giver, the receiver, or the witnesser, from a place of humility, from a place of curiosity, rather than those things not happening, can we have conversations? Can we tend to them when they do come up between us? I forgot where I was going with that, but yeah.
Well, I'm gonna respond to that. That's important to me because when you say the giver, the witness, or the receiver, with as a microaggression is concerned, again, this is what makes your work refreshing because the only thing I've ever seen and heard from people that have experienced this and teachers I've had lunch and dinner with and talked to about these things is they just focus on the giver.
Yeah.
And what that does to me is it belittles the receiver as someone that has no capacity for discomfort.
Mhm.
And then it also dehumanizes the giver as you're just this horrible person committing these hate crimes. But if you go to this place of actually we do it all the time,
Mhm.
all the time. How can we all get to this place where we just kind of witness we're doing it? So then we don't have as many defenses against when someone's insulted or hurt by it,
Mhm.
which means we have a rupture and then we have a repair. And then what happens when there's constant rupture repairs, there's actual resilience within the relational
Yes.
field. You don't
Mhm.
have to do DEI anymore because people are
I,
like, I'm comfortable here.
I
Like,
like to tell people my goal is to work myself out of a job. I'd
that's
love for there to
right.
be a point where you don't need a DEI practitioner, where we have this level of comfort with discomfort, or we have this level of comfort with difference, disagreement, ambiguity. Because again, I find that with whether it's the actual practitioners or the attendees who just give me these rules, tell me these things I need to do. Again, that's still a signal of not being embodied or having such a
Mhm.
high level of discomfort or threat when it comes to difference or disagreement. I just want something to sort of block it and keep me
Mhm.
from it. And so I like to focus my practice, my philosophy on really tending to that. How can I be with the discomfort of not knowing, of there not
Mhm.
being an absolute truth, of there maybe not being a right answer, of this person have this perspective and experience and I have a different one, and we're still safe with one
That's
another.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. And even when you're saying that, what I hear is when you're giving someone a script, you're not actually going into relationship
Right.
because not everyone's offended
Right.
by the same things. Like
Right.
someone would give me a script for you if it was like a common mainstream DEI. They would say, never refer to Camille's hair as dreadlocks. That's racist.
Yes. Yeah.
You don't
Uh-huh.
mind, you have no charge around the word dreadlocks.
No, I don't. In fact, I kind of prefer it.
And you prefer so and so it's so important to say these things because people not everyone cares. You know, there are some people who either didn't even experience, in this case with race, a lot of racialized trauma. They just didn't experience that. Of course, they had like maybe weird looks and some slight aggression, microaggressions on the side, but there was no like major traumatic episode. So they don't have as much charge around certain things, whereas other people did. So they have more charge around it. So to go in and give a script suggests people are almost like these robotic groups, and you can just say, "Well, all these black people are offended by this word. All these white people are offended by this word." It's like you don't know until you meet the person.
Exactly.
So for
Exactly.
you, isn't each workshop almost like a brand new one because you don't know who you're working with?
It is. It's funny. I was actually just doing a workshop the other day, and this the person I'm working with to set it up, she said, I hope this is okay. Would it be okay if I was to like interject some questions or throughout, that are related to what we're working on? I wasn't sure if that was going to throw you off. I was like, no, do whatever you want. Like as the spirit moves you, each, like I have my deck that I go through, but each one is different. She's like, oh, thank you. That's amazing. Somebody who really knows their stuff. And yeah, like each session is different because I work with what's there in the room, and it's really really fascinating to watch some of the people start to just open a little bit, and when they start to feel that it's a little bit different than maybe some other DEI workshops they've been to before, and the things that they are willing to start sharing or they're willing to start asking, um, is always sort of fascinating for me to
Mhm.
be with. And I love the questions and I love the reflections, and that's what I want, like to start being present, to start thinking. Not I'm not here to tell you the answers.
Mhm.
I'm here to like cultivate the embodiment, the presence, and
Mhm.
of being in relationship with another person.
And this is why I keep saying you have to rebrand your work because your work is beyond to me. And this is just me being this is me being a very controlling person right now. It's like you are DEI inspired.
I,
I
yeah,
think
inspired.
DEI initiated you into this, but it is so beyond that for you.
Yeah.
I should say for me, because I'm the one that experiences you differently from that. Like you
Mhm.
come from those understandings and these terms, but you hold it in such a new way. And you hold it somatically. You know, you're
Mhm.
trauma informed, you're somatically informed. So you're not just looking at a PowerPoint, not reading the room, telling them all these terms and things you should do and not do. You're reading the room. You're having a somatic intelligence to feel, well, who am I even speaking to? How
Yeah.
do they feel? Who's already friends here? Who's had an issue last week? What's the rupture in this space? What's the history of this space? Like there's so much relationally there. What you really do, in my opinion, is like systemic relationship work where
Mm.
you're in these, companies and organizations and you're learning what's the relationship these people have with each other and what impedes it. And so when you bring in like microaggression, just to use the term to fall
Yeah.
back on, because I do respect terms connected to lineage. Like I respect that whoever developed DEI or the group of people that
Yeah.
did, and they come up with microaggression, it's the best word they had at the time. It's like this thing that impedes, let's say, like Susan and Scott from being friends,
Mhm.
is he's always talking about blondes being dumb and she's
Yes.
blonde. And
Yeah.
so she like it shuts her down because her dad was an asshole. You know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
like there's so much history there in that one moment when he says that one thing, where to him he's being stupid and silly. To
Yeah.
her, it's hurting her inside.
Mhm.
If they can just learn that about each other, an intimacy emerges. And they
Yeah.
have this amazing connection. And then business wise, businesses go incredibly successful and proliferate in a healthy way because
They do.
everyone's taking care of each other. It's like a family system, right?
They do. They do. I mean, I always like to talk about even the business connection between diversity and inclusion. Diversity helps to yield more innovation. That is, multiple studies have shown that more diverse organizations financially outperform their more homogeneous counterparts
Yeah.
because they're able to innovate at a faster rate because they have more diverse perspectives that they can put together or combine into a product or service before going out into marketplace. And like you were saying, there's also this connection between inclusion and productivity. That is, more inclusive environments have employees that either produce at a higher rate or at a faster rate or at higher quality. Because when we work in a non-inclusive environment, um, we feel the need to cover or we feel the need to hide parts of our identity. And that takes work, it takes effort, it takes energy. But when we work in an inclusive environment where we don't feel the need to hide or cover parts of who we are, where does all that energy now go? Back into our
Mhm.
work, back into
Ooh.
creating, producing, and delivering. So I'm actually not distracted by the need to have to hide and cover who I am. Now, that said, I want to be very clear. That doesn't mean that there still won't be uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah.
We can have, in fact, for me, that is the crux of inclusion. If I walk
Mhm.
into, I like
Yep.
to say, if I walk into any sort of boardroom and I see, a bunch of old white dudes, yeah, I'm going to say that's not inclusive. But if I also walk into a boardroom and I see every color on the rainbow, they got a big old rainbow flag up on the wall and they got all the different religious signs on the wall, but then everybody's also just agreeing, yep, yep, I'm also
That's
going to say
also
that's
not
not an
inclusion.
inclusive environment
That's
either.
right. That's right.
For me, inclusion is a capacity for difference, a capacity for ambiguity, a capacity for non-consensus.
Okay, I have to do two more things, even though and we have to close. But so I wanted to bring up healthy exclusion
Oh,
because
okay.
when you and you can push back whatever you feel.
Yeah.
I want to bring healthy exclusion because when you were saying like bunch of white old guys,
Mhm.
not inclusion, people are allowed to be exclusive, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm curious, how do you hold? Because again, a bend or a rub that comes from a lot of DEI work is like you have to include this, this, this.
Mhm.
And I don't agree with that because if I think of let me think of like an organization that's, let's say, strictly Christian.
Yeah.
And let's say that organization, there is a kind of Christianity that does not believe in homosexuality. They just
Yeah.
don't. Um, and someone applies who is a man who's married to a man,
Yeah.
and they're like, this is beyond our culture. We don't agree.
Yeah.
To me, that's not a bad thing because
Yes.
they shouldn't have to unless they really want to. When you do this kind of inclusion where you just, like you said, check the box, no one's
Yeah.
actually really relating. Just can you talk about healthy exclusion? Like,
Sure,
when
sure,
is
sure.
exclusion good, Camille?
So, okay, love this. So when I do this work, I always like to say, I'm not here to tell you you need to be diverse, inclusive, or equitable. but if you want to, here are some steps you can take.
Nice.
There's actually no law that says a company, an organization has to be diverse, inclusive, or equitable. This is where agency comes in. I get to decide whether or not I want to work at this organization. I get to decide whether or not I want to worship at this particular organization. I get to decide whether or not my values are aligned with this organization. So for me, an organization, and in fact, I love it. I love it when a company says, nope, we hate the gays, can't stand trans people. Thank you. Because now I get to make an informed decision
Yeah,
about whether or not I do or don't want to be in relationship with you.
totally.
Mhm.
Totally. So I'm saying this because I just was off a call with my friend who's from Mexico. And he was saying to me that he is feeling very uncomfortable because he's going to an American college.
Mhm.
And he's seeing that on paperwork and places he gets accepted and things he gets called back for, he has POC next to his name.
Yeah.
And he's saying, I feel like they're being inclusive because I have brown skin, I'm from Mexico, but they don't actually include me in anything. They're not challenging me the way they're challenging other students. They're not
Mhm.
trying to actually set me up for success. I feel like I'm just being brought in here because they're trying to make a diversity quota. And I
Yeah.
can't tell you the amount of friends I had that had this experience.
Mhm.
And so I'm saying that because I said to him, well, if they were really honest with you and they said, I want a Mexican kid in my class because I want to see kids from Mexico learning this stuff and you're really smart. I'm going to push you and help you. And it's going to be hard to get English as your second language, but I believe in you. How would that feel? And he's like, I would fucking love it.
Mhm.
And it's like the difference between someone pretending to include you because it's you're supposed to be inclusive,
Yeah.
someone actually including you, or someone just being like, I don't like Mexicans, don't come here.
Yes.
Like as discriminatory as it is, how
Mhm.
much nicer than to exist in a field of people lying to you?
Yes. Yeah. Like I like to, like I said, when I walk into to a company and I like, you don't have to do this. You don't have to do this.
There's that Camille face that I love.
There's no there. You don't have to do this, man.
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
don't want to do this, don't do that. Because don't
Mm,
do it. Because that's exactly what it's going to yield. It's going to be
mm,
performative. And it's not going to help anybody. And but if this is something that's really important to you individually, a part of your organization, or as a part of your company, or as a part of your academic institution, you will experience the difference. And those who engage with that organization or that company or that academic institution will feel the difference. There's a felt difference I can
mm,
feel when I'm experiencing tokenism versus I can
mhm.
feel when there's an investment in diversity, where there's an investment in that I want those in this space to be exposed to different perspectives, thoughts. I want there to be disagreement. I want there to be challenges. I want them to challenge me as a
Yeah.
teacher, educator, or manager, or a boss. It is a different. There is a difference.
Yeah, and as you're saying it, it's like, I mean, I keep thinking of HLN.
Mhm.
Like we are so diverse. I've never intentionally tried to be diverse. Like
Yeah.
obviously I personally feel most comfortable in diverse spaces, not just racially. I love sexually diverse spaces. I love politically diverse. Like I love all of it. For
Yeah.
what you were saying, I think it comes from me being a nutritionist and knowing that like biodiversity in the gut makes the
Mm.
healthiest bodies and biodiversity in the land makes the healthiest soil. So there's something that nature and the body tells us where actually more succeeds, more builds, more grows in a healthy, sustainable way when there's lots of diversity, like you said, with innovation. And what I love about HLN is I didn't hire anyone for their diversity. Like,
Mhm.
I didn't hire Marika because she's an adoptee in Samoan. She was my friend and she wanted to do this. I
Yeah.
didn't hire you because you're a Black Muslim. I hired you because you answered the questions before I could on Circle and you were a student. I was like, who is this bitch taking over my job? And it's like, I didn't hire Evan because he's like a white Jew. I hired
Yeah.
Evan because he's my dear friend for many years and he's so intelligent. And when I look back on it, I'm like, well, when I look at us now, I'm like, one reason we're so effective is because of our diversity.
Yeah.
Like when I'm in a class and I say to people, hey, you all have agency, even when horrible things happen, they can hear it because there's a Black Muslim next to me for all the other Black Muslims watching. Or the women that are there can hear it because you're there nodding your head, teaching about your experiences.
Mhm.
Or the men that are there can hear it because I'm saying it. They wouldn't hear it if you say it. So we reach so many more people just by being ourselves and our unique identities. But at HLN, we, as you know, I think we're like hyper inclusive. We don't hold anything back from each other.
Yeah.
And we talk about finances openly. We talk about
Yes.
our political views
Yes.
openly. And we all are very different politically. And we're all like laughing about it. So
Mhm.
there's something about the comfort. And do you feel that with our team compared to the businesses you work with? Like a
Oh yeah, I mean,
difference in
this again
comfort.
goes back to the whole inclusion being linked to productivity. Like the last 3 years, I've been some of the most productive in my life because I haven't been worried about like I got to play the game. Let me say it just right. Like I just get to come and say. And again, it's not that everything I say will be agreed with or even
Hmm.
understood, but I'm not having to play the game of how is it going to be interpreted? Oh, is there, do I have to finagle some biases here or like, what's going on? And I mean, we all still have our biases, but it's not like we can acknowledge our biases. In fact, we even say something, let me know if I'm acting on a bias here. And so it's that sort of transparency, that sort of
Yeah.
that openness to be with difference that I find so different
Mm.
and so refreshing. Because again, I don't have to put energy into making sure I'm saying things just right or into making sure that I'm appearing just right. I just get to show up and do the work.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm really feeling that. And when you said about the tokenism thing, it's like you can really feel like I have felt people invite me to things because I'm intersex, and I know that feeling.
You know that feeling.
I'm
Yeah.
like their special shiny toy they're gonna show off to be. I'm like, I don't want to
Mhm.
be your toy.
Yeah.
Like I don't, and I'll play the game sometimes 'cause I get to do my work and like reach new people. So it's
Yeah.
fun for me in that intention. But to be valued just because of your identity in a way that's not actual value or relationship,
Mhm.
it's an icky feeling. Whereas when
Yes.
you're just with people existing as you are, especially when the people don't agree with you always and you still exist as you are with them,
Mhm.
there's such a settling. And even in our membership, we've seen over the years, because we do the tending to rupture every month now, but we see over the years that people witness rupture, they witness microaggression, they witness all these things that we're talking about. And we hold the space for them to unfold it together. And then these beautiful friendships emerge out of going to an uncomfortable place together.
Mhm.
So I'm closing this just by saying I don't know how DEI is functional without somatics and without
Yeah.
being trauma informed. Like to me, it's a cognitive approach, which is a
Mhm.
good start. But to actually integrate it into a relational, embodied way, you have to have some somatics and trauma information knowledge. So can you just close on that? How somatics and trauma have helped you deepen your understanding or effectiveness?
Oh yeah. So I think to your point, I think DEI is what both professionally and personally is sort of what guided me to somatics in that
Mm,
when I was with working in DEI, I started with the traditional stuff, bias, privilege, and microaggressions, which I still talk about, which is important. But as I was with it, I was also realizing we're talking about individual, collective, and generational trauma. That's
that's right.
fundamentally what marginalization is. It's a form of trauma. And trauma is so fucking hard for us to be with. Like we don't when someone dies, oh, I'm so sorry. Let's not talk about that. Or, we don't talk about being pregnant before 3 months because, oh, what if you have a miscarriage? We don't want to be with that.
Mhm.
Like this is something that's so uncomfortable. We don't want to touch. So I even started with the idea of, in bringing into some of my workshops, let's just orient to the fact that what we're fundamentally talking about are people's experiences with trauma. And
Mm,
that is uncomfortable.
mm.
And it was, again, before I even knew the word somatics, it was just noticing in the body, like, what is it? Oh, even that word, when I say the word trauma, even instead of marginalization, what comes up? How do you respond to that? And then when I found somatics, it was just like this epiphany around how I wanted to work with people, inviting them to notice like that life or death um, sensation coming up in their body when they're confronted with somebody who's different from them or who disagrees with them. And can we begin to notice when has my body equated difference or disagreement with a life, with it being life or death?
Mm.
And if I can notice that it's not actually life or death, it's just difference, it's just disagreement, how do I now want to respond? What now starts to come up? What do I want to say? What do I want to ask? What do I
That's
want to
where the goal
share?
is. Yeah,
Yeah.
when I can uncouple disagreement from life or death, like
Mhm.
so much emerges. Because then you'll hear microaggression and you don't get triggered.
Yes.
Like, oh, a disagreement and ignorance, something I didn't realize I said. Teach
Mhm.
me. And
Yep.
I know that place because I've had people tell me I've offended them. I know you have people tell you that you offended them. And you're like my sister in this, where we're both like, oh, tell me, I want to know what I did.
Yeah.
Like we're like fascinated by it because we're not
Mhm.
taking it on because we know we're innocent. We're not throwing any shade at ourselves. And we're like, teach me, I want to grow. And
Yeah.
it's just a beautiful experience.
And I would say I love that because again, there's a curiosity. No, two things aren't happening for us in that situation. One, there's not this reflexive defense of what the hell are you talking about? I didn't.
Mhm.
I know I didn't do anything offensive. But there's also not this reflexive apologizing, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Tell me what I did and I'll never do it
Yes.
again. It is an ability to sit with someone's experience, receive what they experience, and then reflect on it on your own. And then determine how or in what way, if at all, do I want to pivot or evolve what I say or what I do.
Mm, that's right. That's right. Well, I'm leaving this with so much information, which I already knew, but it's so nice to feel in a new context with you because we've talked about this stuff a lot together. But gotta tell you, I'm still hung up on microaggression.
I know,
And like,
I know.
if I had two wishes in the world, I would ask you to rebrand DEI and rebrand microaggression. If you're ever interested in doing that, I
I'll
will
put some
call it
thought
from the
to it.
mountains. But you did an amazing job at teaching us how to see, underneath our own triggers and overcouplings with these words and what might be barriers. And really, those of you, because I've had people write me, I was speaking about this on Instagram to get some input. I've had lots of people write me about experiences that Black, white, men, women, trans people were in my DMs telling me, like, I left feeling really bad about myself, or I left thinking I wasn't, someone said I left thinking I wasn't native enough because of my skin tone. I left. So it's like, I just want everyone to know when you work with Camille, you're not going to get that. Like, that's not what she does. It's so far from that. And I also want to say, just to be kind and humanize these people doing like really hard work, no one is intentionally trying to make someone feel bad.
Yeah.
They're in a trauma response usually, or they haven't fully embodied the work themselves. They're just teaching an idea they don't fully understand or relate to. And
Yeah.
so it's like, if you're working with someone, this is what I would say, and I want your follow up, and then we're closing this thing because I told you this is going to be the episode we can go on
The
for 4
3 hour
hours.
episode.
We got to do the Joe Rogan 3 hour episode. So the thing that now I forgot what I was gonna say. Maybe that's the spirit being
It's
like,
a
you're
sign.
done. You are done. I'm cutting you off. Spirit's like, I'm cutting you off right now. Oh, I know it's gonna be. If you go into a DEI space and you're noticing that it's being taught to you in a way where you're feeling bad about yourself and it's not helping you nurture a curiosity about yourself or others, for me, that's a sign to go find another teacher. Now, that's different from being triggered. I think it's very healthy to be triggered when someone's confronting things that are difficult and unconscious. But when the actual ideas are, this group in here is less than, or this group needs to work harder than this group, or you need to apologize, when there's kind of a directive of how
Mhm.
you should feel or what you should do, I don't see that's going to create diversity. I see it's going to create a lot of guilt and shutdown.
Yeah, yeah. So I like to talk about how there can be an approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion from a place of judgment. And for me, that's a place that breeds guilt, shame, denial, all the things. Um, I like to approach it from a place of curiosity. And from that place of curiosity, you're going to experience more humility, which for me is the
Mm,
biggest one. If you're not experiencing humility from your practitioner, for me, that is not diversity, equity, and inclusion. And from that humility, there's also a self-awareness. If the practitioner themselves doesn't have a level of self-awareness, to me, that's not diversity and inclusion. And as triggering as this is to so many people, and it's just my humble opinion, any sort of DEI work that is presenting absolutes to you is not truly diversity, equity, and inclusion. I do not think inclusion includes absolutes
mm,
because again, those
mhm.
it's very finite. It's definitive. It's exclusive. This is right. This is wrong. For me, inclusion is how are we with the absence of absolutes? How are we with the non-consensus, the mystery, the ambiguity?
That's a really beautiful closing. The curiosity and judgment, the difference there,
Mhm.
and the absolutes. Because when you have absolutes on a group, or absolutes on a word you shouldn't say, or absolutes on a way forward. That's literally the antithesis of diversity. Like
Mhm.
there's nothing diverse about that. And so I think, or inclusive, like you said.
Mhm.
So I love just scanning for, is there an absolute think happening here?
Mhm.
And then, as you and I know, absolute is usually trauma response. Someone's in such a
Right.
binary because they're in an activated state. So that
Right.
is a great way. Um, Camille, tell them how they can reach you. Tell them the kind of
Yeah.
people you work with. Tell them everything you should know about working with you.
Sure, sure, sure. So I like to work with anyone and everyone. So organizationally, I work with huge organizations, and then I work with small startups. I also work with nonprofits doing group workshops. I also do one-on-one coaching as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So if in your workplace, either as a manager or as a peer, or even in your personal life, there's something related to diversity and equity and inclusion you'd like a little support with, happy to do that. And then I also do like what I like to call pure somatic exploration. So if you just want someone who's informed from an inclusive background, but also has a somatic background, and just to be with whatever may be present in your body and to explore it from a place of curiosity, not judgment, I'd love to work with you. And you can find me at www.realtalkbravespaces. My company or DEI company is called Real Talk and Brave Spaces. And you can also find me on Instagram at Camille.leak.
Ooh, that's your first debut of dropping.
It is. This is the first time I plugged
How's it feel?
Instagram.
How's it feel? Does it
It's
feel?
it's different. It's new. Yes.
Love it. Thank you, love. You're such a light in my life and in so many of our lives. This is fun, and we'll do more of this as time goes on. Those
Oh,
of you
good.
listening, please respond. Like this is one of those episodes I really want you to email us about. You can go to info@holisticlifenavigation.com. Any questions, any comments, anything that comes up, and we'll formulate another episode someday about this. So, thank you. That's the end of today's episode. Now let's take a moment to notice where we feel the episode in our bodies. Close your eyes. Take a breath. And let whatever wants to come up, come up. And remember, those sensations hold the wisdom that we're looking for. If you want to go deeper, visit holisticlifenavigation.com.